Hello, I'm Dr. Eileen Hale, the chair of TTELT, Teaching Tips for English Language Teachers. And I'm thrilled to introduce a guest with us today, Anna Ciriani-Dean, who is going to be sharing with us the strategies for reflective practice. Anna has her own podcast. She has co-created the Teacher Think-Aloud Podcast, a podcast for reflective practice for teachers of English around the world. She is also serving as the Learning and Development Coordinator at the English Language Programs. Welcome, Anna. It's a great pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
So, Anna, could you share what exactly you mean by reflective practice? And what does it mean to be a reflective educator?
Yeah, well, I guess the definition is pretty straightforward if you think about it. So reflective practice is simply the practice of reflecting on your own actions and engaging in a process of continuous learning. And so what it means to be a reflective educator is just committing to, I guess, a growth mindset and to this idea of continual growth and transformation as an educator. So, growth mindset, we talk about that a lot for students, but it's also for ourselves, right? So always changing and always learning.
So why is this reflective practice so important?
That's a great question. I think the question within that question is, what makes us better educators? I mean, we can talk about the number of years we've been in the classroom, all the different workshops we go to, the feedback that we get, all of the experience that we have. But experience isn't all that we need in order to really move forward and grow. John Dewey, I think, is the one who said that we do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And so in order to kind of move ourselves forward and become the educators we want to be, there's an important reflection component there that needs to take place.
Definitely. It's funny that you mentioned John Dewey, because I did my doctoral studies in the field of experiential education and service learning. So I'm very familiar with his work. He's a great educator to follow.
Yeah, and did I misquote him? Was that
No, that was
quote?
perfect. Yes, I think that's right, spot on.
Great.
So could you give us an example? What does effective reflection really look like for us to practice out there?
Yeah, so I guess the core of it is that it's very cyclical. As I said earlier, it's about that continuous reflection and continuous growth. So we talk a lot about the David Kolb's experiential learning cycle. This has 4 different components, right? So experience is the first step, reflective observation, then abstract conceptualization, which is kind of thinking about what happened, and then experimentation, and then the cycle starts over again. So from an experience through reflection, and then kind of gathering your thoughts on that, and then applying something that you've learned and seeing how that goes, it kind of is this ongoing cycle of reflecting. And then another part of that, beyond just constantly reflecting every day and seeing how you change over time, is this idea of reflection in action versus reflection on action, which isn't as complicated as it might sound. I mean, reflection in action, this is something that we do every day as educators. So we're in the classroom and something isn't going exactly the way that we want it to be going, and we realize that whatever this activity isn't going according to plan, and so we change course in the middle of a class, or we just make note of, okay, maybe I'll change that next time that I do this. So that's reflection in action. So something that's reflection that's happening while we're teaching, while we're doing all of these actions. And then on the other hand, you have reflection on action, which is that second component that I'm guilty of not always doing. And I think is just the harder component of reflective practice, reflecting on action after the fact. So taking the time to really think about what happened during a lesson, write down a note about what our impressions of how things went, what the learning that we saw taking place, whether or not our lesson plan and the different components of it actually led to learning, the different interactions within the classroom, whatever it is that you're trying to focus on. It definitely takes a little bit more thought and planning and I suppose discipline to make sure that we're including that reflection on action after the fact, so that we can really move our practice forward. So I'd say that that's kind of how you make it effective, is bringing in that component that's not always there.
Yeah, that reminds me of, when you do student teaching, you have to do that. Usually it's required. And when you have, your observer having you reflect on how you thought your teaching went. And but then once you get into the real classroom on your own, I think because we're so busy as educators, it's really hard to do that second piece. I agree.
Yeah. No one has time for that, but it is important to try to integrate as best we can. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have some specific strategies to help teachers, especially with that second component of doing the reflection on action after teaching?
Yeah. I mean, some of them I guess are pretty straightforward. There's always journaling. You can do some kind of free writing, make some time at the end of the day or after each class that you've taught, whatever, frequency is best for you, to do a little bit of free writing. I always get very daunted when I have to just write in this without some kind of format. So I also like to just think of it as bullet points sometimes. I don't have to go into as much depth or write an essay on it. I can just kind of make bullet points, or I can create some kind of rubric that I'm going to use for myself. Did I do this today? What are the things I'm working on? What are my goals? Let's reflect on how I did on these very specific areas. If you're formulating some kind of goal, that's really helpful to have a little bit of a rubric or some questions that you ask yourself every time. And then, some people really don't love the written format. It does take a lot of time, and you really have to sit down and take the time to write it out. So I also recommend voice memos. It's a little bit less daunting. You can just record yourself talking through how you felt, and it's easy to get your thoughts into a voice memo that you can revisit later.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. But I think the most important thing, with whatever format you're taking is it's really about building a routine, because if you don't build a routine, you don't have you don't specify when you're going to do it. You don't try to do it every time or every day or every week, however often you want to do it. Without that routine, it's really easy to forget. So I recommend calendar notifications, setting calendar notifications for yourself at regular intervals, whether they come to you after class or at the end of the day or at the end of the week or whatever it is. Or you can schedule some email prompts for yourself to ask, asking you, how did this go? Or asking yourself more specific questions about how it went and what you were, maybe while you were planning for a lesson, you had some specific questions about, whether this would work or not. You could actually ask yourself those questions in a scheduled email that arrives to you at a time that works for you. Yeah.
What about something have you done like teacher partners or small groups where I think the accountability piece would be really helpful too, if you had somebody to work with on those reflective practices?
Yes. I mean, I that's honestly my preference. Having an accountability partner is really, I think, has been the most helpful for me. I mean, of course, that self-reflection and having a quiet moment to do it myself is very important. But uh, if you have a peer, a teacher friend that you really enjoy talking to, and where you think the conversation really flows, it's really helpful to tell someone about, these are the things that I've noticed, what are your ideas on what I could do? And have them hold you to it and ask you, how did that go? Did you try that lesson out? How did it go for you?
Right.
Did you try that? So having an accountability partner, a single partner is great. And then also, of course, professional learning networks, professional learning communities. If you don't have one and you haven't found one that works for you, you can always create your own and just create a small group of people that you find help you in that reflective process.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great idea.
Mhm.
Super.
Yeah.
So just to wrap up here, what are the most positive outcomes that you have found when teachers actually engage in this practice, and what they can expect
Yeah.
if they actualize your practice?
Yeah. I mean, there's just so much growth that takes place. I think for me, it's a quiet process. It's a long process. You might not feel it right away, but the more you engage in reflective practices, the more you'll start to notice the changes that are taking place in your practice, and also uh, the impact that it might have in your personal life. I know that, we're talking about this professional side of teacher development and reflective practice and how it fits into that. But for me personally, it's also helped a lot in my personal development, because I find that reflective practice is very much connected to mindfulness practices. And so actually reflective practice has spilled into my personal life and the way that I use reflective tools for myself. So I'm much more aware of where I am in my journey, both as a person and as a professional. I know what my strengths, I know what my weaknesses are. I mentioned the bullet points in journaling. I've been doing that uh, in my professional life and in my personal life. It all comes full circle.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's wonderful.
Mhm,
Thank you so much for sharing these wonderful tips, Anna.
mhm.
And if we want somebody out there in the audience wants to find you, we'll put in our show notes your link to your podcast. Any other ways you'd like to have them find you for more
Mhm.
detail?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter, at ACD_ESL. So I would be happy to connect with anybody on there, as well as on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn by searching Anna Ciriani-Dean, and I'd be very happy to connect.
Thanks, Anna. It's been
Mhm.
wonderful talking with you and having
Yeah.
you share these great tips with our teachers out there.
Thank you, Eileen.